100 people. I think we can call that critical mass and get going. Andy, you want to share the slide deck?
Yeah, let me pull up and share my screen. There we go. Is everyone able to see that?
Yep.
All right.
All right. Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming out today. It's everybody's favorite time of year again. Code cycle updates. I'm here to do a quick introduction today. This is the first of a series of discussions Rushing is going to be conducting over the next couple months. All the dates and topics are summarized in the meeting invite. Today's focus is going to be on upcoming proposed changes to the 2021 Seattle Energy Code. To provide a little bit of context of our starting point, we'll give an overview of some of the changes that have passed at the state level. And the purpose of these sessions is to spread awareness of upcoming change proposals, the code development process, and opportunities to get involved in the public review meetings. So if you see opportunities for improvement, suggested editorial changes to enhance enforceability or provide clarity, or just want to learn more about the process, we encourage everyone to get involved and attend those public review meetings. Let's go next slide. So here's a couple of the team leaders that you're going to be seeing in this series of presentations. I'm just playing host today. Our primary speakers are going to be Eric Vandermeer, Andy Burnham, and Nathan Miller. Go next slide. There we go. And a quick blurb about Rushing. As many of you know, we have 7 studios: mechanical, electrical, plumbing, lighting, energy, sustainability, and commissioning. We have a project map on the right-hand side here. You can see our primary market is the Pacific Northwest, but we've done plenty of work up and down the West Coast and starting to spread over towards the east side a bit. Go next slide. All right, so the format for today, we have a slide deck that we're going to be running through. We're going to use the chat box for any questions as we're running through the slides. There's going to be a Q&A session at the end, but we'll be monitoring the chat box in case we are able to answer anything in the meantime. So let's start out with dropping your name and company in the chat box, and as Andy mentioned earlier, share what topics you're most interested in learning about for the 2021 Seattle Energy Code. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Andy to cover the agenda here.
All right. Ree's already mentioned what we're going to be talking about at a high level today, but we're going to start out just talking a little bit about how the code development process works, what to expect in terms of next steps, ways to get involved. We're going to start out with a recap on what has already occurred and been passed in the 2021 Washington State Energy Code, just to set a little bit of context. And then today we're going to talk about the envelope proposals that have been sent out for next Monday's SDCI public meeting. So we'll do a little bit more initial intro and context setting today. Our goal for this session is to be informational, educational, so please do make use of the chat, raise your hand, let us know if there's questions. And again, these are proposals, so we'll be running through and just looking at the language as currently proposed, and talking a little bit about what that may mean for projects in this code cycle. So I'm going to pass it off to Eric to jump in to start a little bit about what is driving the energy code changes both at the state level and in City of Seattle.
Thanks, Andy. So I'm Eric Vandermeer, Chief of Engineering here at Rushing, and we're just going to dive into a little high-level overview of what's driving the changes. Let's pop to the next slide, Andy. And As have we probably heard in the past, there's been a lot of discussion about the state mandates. So there's been a high level of focus on the 70% energy reduction that we're essentially developing an energy code that gets a 70% annual net energy consumption over the 2006 Washington State Energy Code baseline. But then the state goals also require zero fossil fuel greenhouse gas emissions, homes and buildings by 2031. So again, we're developing codes that get us towards those milestones. So really the 2018 and the 2021 code cycles, we're seeing a big shift into that zero fossil fuels greenhouse gas emissions criteria and how to meet that. And then another big change that happened was the change to kind of the constraints on how to do this at the state level. So there's a little bit more leeway in that definition that the thing still must, whatever we adopt has to be technically feasible, commercially available, but it's also to develop the overall to yield the lowest overall cost to a building owner and occupant while meeting the goals of the state. So that broadening the definition by the legislature is definitely allowing things to move quickly in Washington. Let's pop to the next slide. As we know, we're kind of tracking behind where we need to be. The report for the 2021 state code is not yet out. There's been some preliminary reports, but generally the state process is just ending in November, and usually by January, there's a draft report to the legislature on how we're doing to meet our goals. So that's still in development, but we know that we're behind pace, especially in commercial buildings, and that we need to harvest all the good ideas. So we have big goals in Washington. The next slide shows, yeah, go ahead to the next slide. This shows that
Sorry, Eric, I'm doing my best over here. I'm clicking back and forth.
Yeah, there's still a lot of people popping in, so it's great. We also have big state goals about how to clean up our electrical grid to make that carbon free. So those were recently passed in the last few years, and we're working on plans on how we clean up our energy production to eliminate carbon emissions. And so, these goals are all set in place, and utilities and others are working to achieve these goals. So let's pop to the next slide. So as we enter into Seattle's process specifically, Seattle has its own set of resolutions that come through the mayor's office. And these start, the recent ones that we're tracking really start back in 2001, that Seattle's goal is to develop an energy code that's 20% more efficient than 90.1. There's really no specific cost check and balance with that goal. That's the goal of the city. And they can do that for the commercial energy code as allowed by state statute. From there, there's also goals for greenhouse gas emissions. There's the Green New Deal, which happened in 2019, which is basically targets no fossil fuels for buildings. And then there's the Seattle Building Performance Standard that's currently in development based on a mayor executive order from 2021 from last year. And so there are a lot of goals that Seattle has to go above and beyond state requirements. So what we generally see is that Seattle is pushing the energy code forward in Washington and the United States. And what gets into the 2021 Seattle Energy Code is going to be a starting point again for the 2024 Washington State Energy Code. So this is a place for Seattle to push the limits and to start developing options for the state. So with that, Pop the next slide, unless there are any questions on any of the high level goals there. Guess I haven't been watching the chat, but so where are we at in the process? So the 2021 state code has basically gone through the development at this point. And so now Seattle is picking that up and working on incorporating all the state amendments, overlaying them with the 2018 code, the Seattle code, and then updating things from there. So let's move to the next slide, kind of showing that process. So here we are, November, December. So Seattle's planning on conducting public review meetings that are focused around different topics. So envelope, lighting and renewables, mechanical, then energy modeling and the C406 additional efficiency credits, and then alterations to existing buildings. I mean, one thing I kind of skipped over there is Seattle's goals are not just for new construction. A lot of the goals are for improving the existing building stock also. So that is a big emphasis that we're seeing in the codes for Seattle. So the public meetings will be conducted. Seattle's looking for all ideas to clarify and or improve the code to make it more stringent and more enforceable. It goes through these public review meetings. It'll be presented to CCAB at some point, which is the Seattle Construction Codes Advisory Board, which is just an advisory board to the city. Go through city council, the mayor's office, and Seattle's targeting to try to adopt in line with the effective dates at the state, which is planned for July 1, 2023. So we have a pretty short timeline to review Seattle's ideas.
Right. I want to
and implement things. Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, before we move on from this, I just wanted to pause and see if anyone wanted to, do feel free to use the raise hand function in Teams. Just pause here for a second and see if anyone has any questions on the process or what the next steps are kind of within the city level for refining and then finally adopting proposals for 2021 Seattle Energy Code.
Andy,
Yeah, Craig.
So the question I had is, how closely is this city of Seattle going to parallel the state building code goals of trying to get it on? Are they going to have simultaneous hearings and things like that? Because there's a lot of these things seem to be running down the same track. A lot of the same things. Are they in conflict with each other or in parallel with each other?
So the state process is essentially done at this point. The code has been completely developed. The CR 103 has been published. They are still, compiling and a fully compiled version of the code for final publication. But the code has essentially gone through the State Building Code Council. And at this point, there will be a report from the State Building Code Council on what was adopted and how close it gets to the goals that have been set that is sent to the state legislature. That typically happens in the first quarter of which would be 2023 in this case, but the code at the state level is essentially complete at this point and is available at the state. The CR 103 is available online at the State Building Code Council website. So Seattle is now that that's complete, Seattle is working on their revisions. And this is happening not just for the energy code, it's happening for, the building code, the fire code, the mechanical code. All these are going through kind of the final review over the next few months through CCAP and FCAP.
And Eric, I would add the draft code proposals that are available.
And
Go ahead, Andy. Oh, as of right now, only the envelope proposals have been circulated, and that's what was attached to the meeting invite today. So all of the proposed language is in that meeting invite for this presentation today.
For the Seattle proposed changes, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
And it also, so if you open up the meeting invite that Rushing sent out, there's an attached email to there that's Dwayne John Lim that has both the proposals, but it also has the invite to the first public comment meeting, the December 5th. It looks like it'll be a WebEx meeting starting at 10:30, running till 12:30. So that's all attachments in our meeting invite.
Okay, Andy, any other? So that's kind of the process that's in front of us. So we'll be stepping through next some of the major changes at the state level, and then we'll be moving to the Seattle specific changes that are proposed and up for discussion on Monday. So.
All right, so with that, let's jump in. So we're going to start with just a bit of context about what's already been adopted for the state code level. There was a lot of things changing in the 2021 Washington State Energy Code. We're not going to touch on every single little thing, but we are going to try to hit on all of the kind of biggest ticket items that are going to have the most impact to projects. It's always kind of a fun little fact nugget that, there's almost 160 proposals that were considered and evaluated as part of the code development process. So a lot of participation, a lot of time in the technical advisory groups, supporting review of those proposals, et cetera, before getting to the final approved version by the Building Code Council. At a high level, a lot of the 2021 updates for the state were catching up to Seattle's 2018 amendments. So that included a lot of discussion about and finally adopting some provisions for electric heat pumps, for space heating, some exceptions for use of natural gas on the east side in Climate Zone 5, but also for domestic and service water heating. So that was a big thing that's something that's already been in effect in Seattle for the 2018 code cycle. Low-rise residential buildings were grouped into the commercial building sections of the code for dwelling units that are accessible to interior corridors. So not if they're exterior doors, but for typical interior corridor group R2 units that are 3 stories and less. Those are now under the commercial code. Pretty significant changes to C406 and C407. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more detail on the next couple slides. As well as a big one, mandatory renewable energy. Previously, that had been an optional appendix that different jurisdictions could choose to adopt or not. Now that is a mandatory portion of the energy code for the entire state. As well as allowing some options for renewable energy credits or some offsite PV in lieu of just onsite. So some language about exceptions, et cetera, but that was a pretty significant one. Another item is adopting UPC, the Plumbing Code Appendix M for distribution pipe sizing. That's a pretty significant change in how plumbing systems are being sized. So let's jump also into what are some things that didn't change. Natural gas did not get banned. There were proposals adopted that will mandate the use of heat pump for certain applications and have limits on where you can use fossil fuel for space heating, but it's still allowed as a secondary source and backup source for service water heating and domestic water heating. And there's still no limit on process uses, such as cooking, fire pits, barbecues, that sort of thing. So I think it's an important distinction that natural gas is not banned in Washington state, but there are these proposals that have moved towards adoption of heat pumps for certain applications. Similarly, electric resistance heating is not entirely banned. There are the heat pump requirements for space heating, but there are some exceptions available for dwelling units as well as supplemental backup heat sources and some additional exceptions for domestic water heating sources. There were some minor changes in envelope, but nothing quite as big and drastic as was introduced in the 2018 code cycle with the limits on envelope trade-offs with energy modeling approaches. That was a really significant jump in the 2018 code cycle. Fenestration U factors were increased in stringency slightly, but other than that, there weren't too many significant envelope changes. So talking a little bit more about what that means for, at the state level, heat pump proposals. This is similar to 2018 Seattle Energy Code's heat pump requirements. Recognizing that this is a state code, there was some additional exceptions allowed for use of natural gas in Climate Zone 5, so kind of on the east side of the Cascades. But so this is going to be more or less mini split systems, VRF systems, water source, VRF or heat pumps, through wall package terminal heat pumps. A lot of folks are starting to look at the Innova or Epica units, vertical terminal heat pumps, or if you've got like a hydronic system, air to water heat pumps to produce hot water. As well as some exceptions, again, for supplemental and backup for electric resistance. Let's talk a little bit about the water heating heat pump changes. These were fairly controversial, a lot of discussion, a lot of time spent in technical advisory group meetings reviewing these proposals. Where this landed for water heating was a little bit of a compromise solution that got into the final adopted package. So it's essentially 50% of load at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So a little bit of an in-between what Seattle adopted for 2018 energy code, and then still allowing use of gas boilers for the remaining 50% and any backup heat source. So that's where that shook out for the state. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that that's an example of, we tend to say, well, what happens in Seattle just gets passed on to Washington State Energy Code next cycle. This is an example of where they didn't just literally take the Seattle language and adopt it. It went through a lot of discussion and ended up in kind of a compromise place to make the Washington State Code more stringent, but not quite the full leap that Seattle did on domestic hot water heat pumping.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. Thanks for that, Nate.
There was a lot of fun discussion at the state level on this topic about electric heat pumps versus natural gas heat pumps versus all other types of technologies out there. So 50% electric heat pumps, big step forward for the state. So.
Yep. So some technology options that we're seeing more and more for that would be air to water heat pumps, either located on rooftops, in parking garages, water to water heat pumps. We're also starting to see some more projects utilize sewer thermal heat recovery. So that would be Piranha's one manufacturer that makes that type of wastewater heat recovery system type. All right, so C406 had some pretty significant changes. It's a additional iteration on the complexity that was introduced in the 2018 code cycle of, gone are the days where it used to just be, hey, you've got a list of 8 credits and you pick 2 off the list for your entire building. We've since moved into area weighted average credits where you can apply different credit packages based on your building occupancy. So you can apply different credits to, say, your group R2 portions relative to if you've got some group B components or things like that. The 2021 Washington State Energy Code has introduced an additional layer to that, where now not only is your number of credits available varying by occupancy type, but now your target number of credits is also varying by occupancy type. And it's also switched to a carbon-based metric. So PNNL did a bunch of energy modeling prototypes and analysis to develop the requirement point targets as well as the points available for the different credits by occupancy type. And they've switched it to a carbon metric that I believe is like 0.1% savings as a point. So that's why it looks a little scary that the point numbers have gotten really big of hey, I have to get 54 points for my group R1 space, but it's just kind of a whole new metric and baseline for what those points refer to. So don't be scared by the larger numbers, but it is a more complicated calculation. But with that more complicated calculation is also more options. So now there's 31 credits to pick from in the state code. They're not all applicable to every single project type, but I think that a key takeaway is C406 is getting significantly more complicated, but there's also more options. And so I think ultimately there will be a bit more flexibility for projects to pick from. The other significantly new thing is there's a second C406 credit for new construction projects for load management credits. So there's now two C406 calculations, one for energy efficiency credits and one for load management credits. So there's now two different packages to document for your projects in 2021 Energy Code. Similarly for the C407 energy modeling pathway, so C406 is your prescriptive code pathway, C407 is your energy modeling pathway. What's new here for the state code is we've added a second site metric. So the 2018 code, we kind of are using a new modeling baseline. There's some pretty significant changes. We're using carbon factors as our metric in lieu of just straight energy savings. But so what's being layered on for 2021 is we're cranking down those building performance factors, but then we're also adding a second site metric that includes both your regulated and your unregulated energy. The current building performance factors only apply to your regulated energy, which is your HVAC, your lighting, things like that, and does not apply to your unregulated, which would be your plug loads or process equipment or things like that. I saw someone just raised their hand, but then it went back down. Does anyone have a question they'd like to jump in with? Maybe an accidental hand raise. All right, I'm going to go ahead and keep going. And if anyone does have a question, please do raise your hand. So that's the significant new item for 2021 state level for energy modeling is we now have two metrics that we have to comply with, both a building performance factor and a site energy factor. And then we talked about this a little bit already, but a pretty big change for the state level is mandatory renewable energy. Historically, that's always been an optional appendix that some jurisdictions adopt, some jurisdictions don't. Now it's across the board mandatory renewable energy requirement for Washington State. So that's a pretty significant jump. There are some exceptions available. You can do that by trading for additional C406 credits. There's also opportunities to utilize some renewable energy credits or RECs. You might hear them called RECs. But it's a pretty significant jump. So that's another big item that happened at the state level. I think the biggest takeaway that we always like to flag for folks is, you know, the 2018 and now the 2021 code cycles are really driving a mandatory integrative design process. So that's getting feedback from the MEP early. That's, you know, making sure that there's a clear path for energy code compliance. It's making significant design decisions earlier and not just assuming that what you did on your last project that may have been under the 2015 code cycle is still going to work. There's a lot of new things that are changing in the codes. So thinking that through up front and getting teams on board earlier to help inform significant design impacts of, for example, ERVs and, you know, floor to floor heights and or things like that for multifamily projects is one really big example that has rolled in with the 2018 code. Those types of things are going to continue to be really important for the 2021 code and beyond.
And it just isn't going to be simple to shift a project that's under the 2018 code to, you know, that you want to delay start of or permitting of to the 2021 code. I mean, it's different metrics, different systems, different protocols. So
I was just going to say, I hope some of our contractor friends who are on this call are ready to offer some pre-con estimating services as we sort through 31 C406 menu choices and try to find the optimal cost package. So again, we'll have more flexibility, but more options to consider in a lot of the changes to the code.
All right, I'm going to just pause there for a moment. Does anyone have any questions before we move on to dive into the envelope proposals for Seattle's amendments to the state code?
Andy, one question that came in was, where do the building performance factors come from?
Okay, great. Sorry, I didn't have the chat pulled up. Yeah, those building performance factors are, I believe that those are based on, again, prototype modeling by PNNL. And then the Washington State for 2021 included the same 10%, just kind of cranking all of those down by 10%. That was part of the 2018 Seattle Energy Code. Any other questions before we move on? Comments? All right. It's freezing a little bit. There we go. Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about the Seattle process?
yeah, so we're going to shift over to what's upcoming in Seattle now that we've recapped some of the major changes at the state. So let's flip to the next slide, Andy. And, within Seattle, Dwayne conducts these, what I would call more informal public meetings. Dwayne's been, reaching out to design professionals and contractors and folks about what are the next great set of ideas while he works on these, in conjunction with Seattle City Light and SDCI. And so Dwayne conducts these informal meetings. He's posted, the upcoming topics that are planned for envelope for the upcoming meeting next Monday. And then those proposals we discussed do get routed through the Seattle Construction Codes Advisory Board for any recommendations there, through City Council and then through the Mayor's office. So that's the general process. It happens a lot quicker than what happens at the state level. And as we talked about earlier, so we don't know exactly what is going to happen for the Seattle projects yet. That's going to start to unfold over December and January here, what the things are, but they're still planning on implementing and having an effective date of July 1, 2023 for this code cycle. So yeah, it's going to happen pretty quickly in the Seattle process here. So.
And one thing I'd like to point out, to Eric's point of why we're calling it kind of a more informal process, is if you have a great idea of something you'd like to get implemented in Seattle Energy Code, there's not like a form that you fill out the way there is for Washington State. It's more like contact Dwayne and give him your idea and he'll consider it and maybe it'll show up. And that's why it's not quite that regimented process that the state goes through as it develops its codes.
And that's largely based on Seattle's ordinance, right? They're trying to develop a code that's 20% better than 90.1, and that meets their goals in their local ordinances, so resolutions. Okay, so with that, let's flip, and we're just going to recap the upcoming meetings planned for Seattle. So it's envelope on Monday the 5th, lighting and renewables on the 12th, mechanical changes on the 19th, and then I think are we missing a meeting in there? I think we are. Anyways, I think there's a meeting in early January and then alterations to existing buildings. There is a meeting in early January.
Oh yeah, there's a C406, C407 meeting. Looks like that got deleted, but we'll add that in before we post any slides or anything.
So there are 5 planned meetings right now, and then an additional meeting if required towards the end. Dwayne typically releases his planned items to discuss, a week or two ahead of the meeting, and is looking for any ideas that you have on, how to improve the clarity of the code, or any big ideas that you have for those sections. So let's pop to the next slide.
Really quick, I think I saw Dwayne, are you on the call? Are you planning on doing the same 10:30 time slot for all of the meetings? That was one of the questions in the chat a little bit ago.
Yes, that's the plan.
Not to put you on the spot.
They're typically Mondays, except for one that had a Monday holiday that's on a Tuesday, and they're at 10:30.
Okay. Okay, great. I'll add the 10:30 time slot. Thanks for confirming.
So in conjunction with this, Rushing's planning these webinars. We have one planned for next week to review the upcoming Seattle topics for December, and then one planned in early January to do a little recap of what's happened and how things are going, just to keep our clients and friends and interested parties informed. So let's go into the specific Seattle changes that came out on Monday for the envelope.
Nate, do you want to talk about these a bit?
Sure. So the proposals that we've seen so far for Seattle are that are impacting the envelope. The most significant ones, well, really all of them, are adjustment to the allowable glazing ratios based on the building type. So different glazing percentage allowed for different facility types, and we'll get to that in a moment on the details. A pretty notable desire to basically force the hand to incorporate some high performance glazing. We kind of loosely are referring to it as triple pane glazing for 20% of the glazing on the project. There's other ways of hitting the targets that don't necessarily mean you have to use triple pane, but essentially really high performing glazing systems mandated for a portion of the glazing. Again, because that would be sort of moving the baseline up on what's required, then it also changes sort of the targets allowed if you need to trip into the higher performance fenestration alternates, which allowed you to exceed the glazing percentages that we haven't yet shown you, but that we will. And then finally, we're not seeing changes to the C407 allowance proposed right now, unless that comes up when we get to the C407 revisions at a future meeting date. So that what that means is there is still the intent that you would have 110% envelope UA allowance if you take the energy modeling path, so that slight bit more flexibility than if you take the prescriptive path.
And what we've seen, is that there's a high investment in the building envelope, because it's not very often that we reglaze buildings, right? So the envelope's going to be there for 50 plus years. We know we have goals that our buildings have to be better. Seattle has goals for both, the new buildings being built and for the existing buildings. And so high emphasis on the envelope, whereas with some of the mechanical systems and such, we know that, and lighting systems, we know that they're going to be replaced or upgraded in 20 years or 30 years. So high emphasis on the envelope and how we build a quality envelope for the life of the building, basically. Let's pop through the specifics on some of these changes, Nathan.
Yeah, so here's the sample table of what I was talking about, where the amount of prescriptive glazing that you'd be allowed would vary depending on your type of project. Obviously, the mixed use projects, you have to start talking about maybe blending some of these numbers. This is all based largely on the allowances in 90.1 Appendix G, but it's a pretty big departure from how we previously had things, which was basically regardless of building types, you would be, up to 30% glazing, and then have to start using some exceptions to creep up to 40 or past 40% glazing. It is a little bit complicated in the sense that there's a lot of different targets here. Some of them depend on the square footage of a given building type. So for example, office buildings, depends how much square foot we're talking about, would then change the glazing allowance. Again, this is all just proposed, and we do have the opportunity to provide comment on this. And Andy, I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm sorry, I have to transition off. My apologies.
Yep, no worries. Thanks, Nate. So the second kind of biggest impact change is, the change in glazing ratio allowances is, some are increasing beyond the previous 30% allowances. So that's providing some more options and flexibility for some building occupancy types. Some are decreasing slightly. So this is a bit of a generally, though, providing more flexibility and acknowledgement that different buildings, it's reasonable for different buildings to have different quantities of glazing. The second item here is the 20% of all glazing becoming triple pane or some similar high performance. So that's a 0.24 fixed for a curtain wall, window wall, storefront type system. The current target is 0.28 for operable components of those types of systems. 0.20, 0.22 for more of like a punched opening vinyl window type product. And the intention with this proposal is to normalize use of triple pane products and get these more into the market and manufacturers up to speed on producing and utilizing these triple pane products. Through the 2018 code cycle, there have been a few projects starting to utilize triple pane in order to achieve higher glazing ratio targets, or potentially adding, say, a second low E coating or just some of these other incremental glazing system improvements. The intention with this proposal is to make that a mandatory portion of compliance that will essentially get triple pane as more of a typical product used, get manufacturers producing more, get folks used to installing and utilizing. So that's the intention with this proposal here. I will take a look and see what comes out with the C407 proposal language, but our current understanding is that this would be essentially a separate kind of backstop item. So it's not something that you could just trade off as part of your 110% C407 envelope allowance. So this would be for all project types. And similarly, those same performance targets would become the new high performance fenestration alternate. So under past code cycles, it would be you had a 30 or 35% glazing ratio allowance. You were allowed to exceed that threshold if you used one of the additional glazing exceptions. So there's one for daylighting, there's one for high performance fenestration, and this is cranking down those high performance fenestration values to essentially that triple pane or very high performance glazing thermal performance target.
Andy, quick question
yeah.
for you in the chat.
Yep.
Talking about a mixed use building and blending the window to wall ratios, we're assuming that would be on an area weighted basis, similar to how C406 calculations are working right now.
That's my current understanding. I don't want to put Dwayne too on the spot, but Dwayne, do feel free to chime in if you have anything that you would like to comment or add today. I know that that's going to be on the Monday public meeting, but if you do have anything you'd like to add today, feel free.
This is your circus, Andy. I don't want to
Sure.
but yes, we can, within those categories, you can trade, the exception being, as Andy said, that we intended for the high performance glazing to be 20%, whatever you do.
And Dwayne, is the intention that could you, if you have multiple system types, like if you have some storefront glazing and then some punched opening vinyl, do you need to have 20% of each system category, or can it be more than 20% of your vinyl punched openings that offsets 20% of the area of a storefront?
Yeah, it'd be 20%. You pick which ones.
Okay. So yeah, our understanding is that would then be, yeah, like an area weighted vision glazing UA calculation.
Right.
And then going back one slide on the, glazing maximum window to wall ratio based on the type, there are some items to potentially track through for, change in use. Say you permit a building as retail or something, and then it gets changed to an assembly occupancy or something when you go through a TI or an office occupancy or something. How do you track that? That's one of our questions that we'll be probably trying to figure out. Anyways, it's an interesting little wrinkle. So. Anyways, more to go on that later.
I'm sorry, Eric. This may be my audio quality, but I didn't catch a good chunk of that. Was everyone else able to hear Eric's comments? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, Andy, I was just saying that.
Okay.
If space changes occupancy, then how do we track?
All right. Do we have any other
change? Did we lose you, Andy?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I apologize if it's my audio cutting out.
We can
I'm
hear
only
you
getting
just
about
fine,
half
so.
of what you're saying. Okay.
Okay, let's move to the next slides.
All right, so last item is expanding the 2x8 R25 requirement to non-residential. So that's essentially the extent of envelope changes in the 2021 Seattle Energy Code proposals. So let's just go into, does anyone have any questions, thoughts, comments? Please do feel free to raise your hand or post a question in the chat. Or does anyone have any other questions about what to expect for next steps in the code development process, or any other items? Yeah, Shayna.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a really helpful conversation. Just one clarifying question with the OSHRAE 90.1. Is that the 2013 version that's being referenced with Appendix G?
It's ASHRAE 2019. So. So it's the new ASHRAE 2016 and 2019 are the new static baseline version, where it's essentially creating an ASHRAE 2004 baseline with the building performance factor that sets kind of a stringency beyond that baseline. The building performance factor will get tighter and tighter and tighter as the code cycles go on, but the baseline stays more or less the same. So it's that newest version, that's that new kind of static baseline methodology.
Was Shayna asking about the glazing percentages from ASHRAE?
More specifically, the ASHRAE version that the percentages are being compared to.
Yeah, where did those glazing percentages come from, Andy, is the question.
Yeah, it's that ASHRAE 2019 glazing ratios, but then there's a few items that were somewhat low and got increased. So let me jump back down to that. So like the grocery store and retail standalone were more or less doubled.
Got it. Thank you.
I see a question from David on changes to light level allowances. I don't believe that those proposals have been published yet, so public meeting for lighting and renewable energy will be next up on, what's that, the 12th? Yeah, the 12th. So stay tuned for that.
I could give a brief summary.
Yeah, please, Dwayne.
Just there, for most interior spaces, they're 10% below the latest ASHRAE 90.1 selection, which ends up being about 5% lower than our current Seattle code.
All right, thanks for sharing that preview, Dwayne. We've got a question if the PowerPoint will be available or distributed. Eric Reed, I'm assuming we're planning to post this online. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll post a PDF online. That's fine.
Yeah, we'll post a PDF
Andy
of the
will
slides.
be posting it on our Mindshare as well. So yes, that'll be posted for each
Great.
session.
Right, any other questions? All right, well, hopefully this has been helpful information. Just a reminder that there are public meetings coming up. So our goal with these sessions is just to share information, provide a little context on what the proposals are, so that folks, if you do have ideas for other ways to save energy in buildings, other proposal options, things like that, please do feel free to. Dwayne, I apologize. I should have asked you before I just put this in, but do send your comments to Dwayne Johnlin, and he's reviewing, consolidating, and will evaluate any comments received.
We're not only accepting comments, we're begging for comments. and the people whose faces you see on the screen here have been giving me plenty, and it's really helping a lot.
Well, we all have to live with the codes, and so it's our chance to influence them.
Andy?
Yep.
Oh, can you hear? Question. I'm looking at the Seattle code site, and it doesn't have any, these meeting dates aren't listed on the building code website. And are these going to be virtual meetings where we can dial into something, Dwayne, or?
We have set up an in-person meeting room. I don't know how many people will actually come anymore because we're all so comfortable in our living rooms, but there will be an online option as well. The downside of the online is that when a conversation gets started in a room, it's hard to follow when you're just on a Zoom call.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Seattle Code Adoption page, and the meeting dates for the Construction Codes Advisory Boards are different days than what these are listing.
And this is not the Construction Codes Advisory Board.
Okay, so separate. Yeah.
And with that email address they gave for me, anybody who's on this call who would like to be on our email address, our listing that's not already there, just send me an email and I'll put you on that list. Just be careful what you ask for.
Right, will do. Yeah, thank you.
And I know there was an official meeting announcement that came out today about these upcoming meetings. If you're on the SDCI, if you're signed up to be on their newsletter link that you can sign up online for. So it is getting publicly published through the typical SDCI informational channel and channels out there. So
great, thank you.
And I did somehow miss adding that C4. There's an early January C406, C407 meeting. I'll add that in before we post a PDF of these slides. So my apologies for the the omission on this current slide, but we'll get that fixed before we post it. All right. Well, with that, I think we're pretty well through questions. I'm not seeing anything else coming in the chat, so you can all officially have